Good afternoon everyone, my name's Dan, I work for Breakeven, Clinical Operations Manager. So it's an absolute pleasure to have these guys on stage here today. Fully lived experience panel, and we'll hear from all of them today. So firstly, if we can introduce George, Abby and Neil, and we'll hear from them individually. George, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey and what sort of support you got back in your day and how different it looks like today.
Afternoon everyone. So my journey, I'm an Essex boy, the baby of four kids. Don't look like a baby now, but obviously I was then. Mum and Dad, West Indian. Dad got divorced, so I didn't live with my dad, I lived with my mum at an early age. And throughout me growing up, there was always hard to talk about that culture, where there was a culture of West Indian culture of playing cards and playing dominoes. So that's how I grew up on weekends, etc. As I got older, so sport was a main thing for me, whether it's football, cricket, athletics, etc. But alongside that, there was obviously cards and dominoes. So secondary school, got a new set of friends, but even my school friends, and when we had sleepovers, we would play cards and dominoes. And then when I was playing football, also, when we used to play for Essex and England, etc., there was still that culture of cards and gambling. So back in them days, we would be gambling for pennies, 2p's, 5p's. So that ran alongside me growing up and then into my footballing career. So lucky enough, I played for a side, I don't know if you heard of West Ham. So we don't say that too loudly in a minute because of how we're doing. But so I was a local lad, so I ended up signing for West Ham, apprentice forms, and then going on to be a pro. So my first wage was £25. So that was apprentice back in them days, 81. I know I don't look it, but back then. And then when I first, my second year as a professional, I was earning £50 a week, which obviously in the beginning of the 80s is a lot of money. So my issue was obviously, however much I was earning, I was still gambling that amount. So what then happened, obviously my career went on to bigger and better things, and then as I started playing first team games, I got more money. But my issue, as I said, whenever I had more money, I would end up gambling all that money. But my brothers and sisters never had that problem, so it wasn't hereditary. It was just me personally. So the thing with it, everyone knew I was gambling, but they didn't know to what extent. So that happened throughout my career. I moved from West Ham to Birmingham, and then Birmingham to Brighton. But are you the only Brighton supporter? Yeah, okay. So then what was happening, as my money grew, I was wasting it all the time, and I suppose it came to a head 1996, so at which time we were renting a house. So even though when I lived in Solihull, I had a 4-bedroom semi-detached with 2 garages, etc. When I moved down from Birmingham to Brighton, we ended up having to rent in Brighton because I basically lost all that money. So even then, I bluffed my way through it. My wife knew there was a problem, but she didn't know to what extent. And then I said it first come to head 1996, so by which time I exhausted all the funds that I had. I begged, borrowed, stole, you name it, I'd done it. And I can remember being in New Haven, and I was walking along the bridge there, deciding whether or not do I jump in the water or not, etc. Luckily for me, I didn't. So went home, addressed the problem, spoke to my wife, and as I said, knew I gambled, but she didn't know that we didn't have a penny to, I won't swear, but yeah, in the pot. So then at that stage, when I was, 96, there wasn't really that much help around. So I saw my manager at Brighton, explained that I had a problem, and then in those days it was a case of, okay, you've got a problem, we'll just get on with it. So I tried to get on with it. We had a football match the following day, and I think that game was one of my worst games I ever played, but it was out there. But even then, as I said, there wasn't that help. So all you try to do was try and stop gambling, but as we know, there's sometimes other things around that. So I ended up having a couple of slips along the way. And then luckily I stayed in the household as such, but my last slip was in 2005. Got chucked out of the house. So that for me was my light bulb moment. Haven't gambled since, and obviously as time went on there was the help there, so I went into sporting chance for a little bit because obviously that sporting background. But yeah, that's where I was, I suppose 20 years ago, so there wasn't as much help as there is now, and obviously I work for Breakeven, so I know what help there is out there.
Fantastic, yeah, I mean, George very often undersells himself. Obviously he helps people now day in, day out. I'm just going to hand over to Neil, who also works for Breakeven. The beauty of Breakeven is, you know, almost half our staff have lived experience, which is really, really important to have that balance. But I'll hand over to Neil to tell you a little bit about his story and also the group stuff and the group work he does.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah. My name's Neil, and I grew up in Scotland, as you can tell by the accent, and a little mining village. And like George, I started playing cards. It was like a pastime sort of type thing with the peer group playing for pennies, and it escalated into the houses and playing for more money. And then 16, 18, it was wages, and I suffered a psychosis. What happened was I progressed into the bookmakers. And for 6 weeks, I spent my wages. I never got one winner. And I was just betting, and spent every penny. And I was going home to my mother, and I said to her, sorry, what she knew by that was, there was no money. She was a very proud woman, and I was a very quick-thinking person. I was very manipulative, and I had a lot of debts. Even at that young age, I had Provident, things called Monogies, like anybody that's Scottish and all engineers, you'll know what that is. When I'm saying sorry to her, she had to face the debts that she couldn't pay. I wouldn't ask her, like an example of manipulation would be, I wouldn't ask her, could I borrow the milk money? What I would say is, have you paid the milkman? And she'd say no. I say, when does he get paid? She'll say, Friday. I say, well, I get paid on Thursday. Could I have the money? Sort of thing. And after doing that for 6 weeks, I just lost the plot. It was just a complete emotional breakdown, and I ended up in a psychiatric unit for 6 months. And when I came out, I could hardly shave, sort of type thing. A couple of years after that, another gambling-related illness was event. I ended up in Berlin prison. Me and a couple of guys had done some, we stole some stuff and sold that stuff, and I ended up in prison. And when I was in Berlin prison, I thought, I'm going to get my life in order. I'm going to get my life. I'd never get anything at school. They asked me the wrong questions at school. They asked me what 6 sevens were. I didn't know that. If they asked me what 6/70 pences were, I knew that was £4.20. So they asked me the wrong questions. I was kept back, and I labelled myself stupid, thick and inadequate. So when I was in prison, I thought I'm going to get my life together. So I came out and I moved away because my mother's house was a den of inequities. So she'd moved away to with her boyfriend and stuff, and it was all drink, drugs and gambling in the house. So I moved to a homeless hostel about 3 miles away, and I get counselling. And I could tell this counsellor every single thing that she wanted to hear, and I believed it. I would have passed a lie detector test. When I get my money, I'm going to pay my mother the money for the debts, I'm going to pay my money for the hostel and all the rest of it. But as soon as the money touched my hands, all of a sudden, 230, 3 more. All the times of the dogs and the horses were there, and I was away gambling. I was eventually going to get kicked out of this hostel, and the woman behind the jump, she says, the reception, she said, do you want to stop? Unbeknown to me, she was an alcoholic in recovery, and she had access to people in recovery. And this man, to this day, it blows my mind, he travelled 20 miles, picked me up in a car, took me to my first GAMS Anonymous meeting. I went into this meeting, and there was a pamphlet, and it had 20 questions on it. And I cried. I never cried through embarrassment, shame, or anxiety, or anything. I cried because how did they get inside my head when I'm reading these questions? And I proceeded to go to these meetings weekly. But the thing is, I thought it was a financial problem. And for the next 17, 18 years, I thought it was a financial problem. Because when I went there, I stopped gambling. So then I stopped having a financial drain. Why did I need to go? Something better comes on in a night, sort of type thing. So I struggled for the next 17 years. I came down and terrorised England, sort of thing. And I've lived in most hostels in the south of England, Oxford, Bristol, London, Southampton, all over, sort of thing. And my recovery really started when I stopped drinking. For anybody who's 39, trust me, life begins at 40. I stopped drinking at 40, I stopped gambling at 41, and I stopped smoking at 42, sort of thing. And I get into recovery, and I'm still in recovery, and I go to meetings, and I go to meetings every week in GAMS Anonymous. I'm part of like AA, and I've done sort of kind of talks in prisons and all sorts of things. I was sending people 12, 15 years ago to Breakeven because I knew stopping gambling wasn't enough. I knew stopping gambling wasn't enough because I've had experience of stopping gambling. There has to be a life after it. So I ended up going to Breakeven myself. I was a volunteer because I was unemployable. I was a volunteer with CGL, Change, Grow, Live. I done smart recovery courses. I invested in myself. I done the 12 steps to recovery. I done an NLP practitioner course. I done all these different personal development stuff. And I went into education, started entry level 3 education, which you don't sort of test at entry level 3. What you do is you have an interview after it. Sort of type thing, entry level 2, 1, and 10 years later, I get a diploma. I became a therapist, counsellor, and working with Breakeven. And the progression is emotional progression. It wasn't financial, it wasn't kudos, it wasn't ego-driven, it was emotional. I was able to tell my mother I loved her. I was able to go and visit family, friends. I was able to go to my mother's funeral. I was able to go to my father's funeral. These are things that I couldn't have done in the states that I was in during the course of my lifetime. Hence, I'm in recovery, stability, and as Dan referred to, what do I do within Breakeven that I can utilise within my life that can help other people? So I recognise there isn't a lot out there for people who want abstinence from recovery. You know, like support is one thing, support what the client wants. Abstinence is something else. So I put together a course called Green Shoot Recovery. And I was thinking as well, how do you communicate with people? You communicate with people maybe verbally, do they get a bit disorientated with that, a bit that kind of switching off. So I come up with the concept of doing a workbook. So it was a visualisation, it was something they can refer to during the course of their lifetime. And in this workbook, it's got, so first of all, the client will go through the process of counselling, and the counsellor will ask them, if they're 4 weeks gamble free, would you like to join an abstinence? And then if they say yes, I'll speak to them for about 20 minutes, get a bit of the background, tell them a bit about what the course is about. And the course is looking at things that people don't ask people. What did you enjoy about gambling? How much money did you lose? All the sort of kind of underlying things. And then we look at goal setting, we look at mind, thought processes, catastrophizing, mind reading. I've got a coaching, I've done a coaching course as well. And I asked them a very important question. what's your definition of happiness? Because whatever I get back, that's what the whole purpose of life is. And once you get through this process of the 7 weeks, we do it on team for an hour. I started doing 10 at a time, but now I've put it up to like doing 2 courses, because I've got 17 starting this, 10 starting on the Sunday, and I've got 7 starting on the Monday. Because it's been popular, because people are looking for something, they're looking for guidance from within to go out rather than out from within. And to get through that process, we've started something called the Growth Hub. So people are peer-led, and they do a workshop on a Sunday night, and they've got access to counselling or any access to help, because these people from all walks of the community have got great skills within themselves, and they bring that to the forefront. We have Gambling Anonymous here as well, just across the road here, 11 AM on a Saturday morning, and we have between 10 and 15 people. So the nurse over there, if you want any sort of kind of speakers for Gambling Anonymous, and the social describing team as well, if you could like contact them, because we do one other thing, we do a gambling awareness course in Brighton through the Recovery College. Me and my colleague over there is doing the T's, and the gambling awareness, it isn't certificated, but it really gives you an idea, and it is awareness of what gambling is, from a social gambler to gambling harms, the channel, what's out there locally for help as well. There's a lot of good stuff out there that locally that's good for help, and online as well. And I'd just like to say thanks very much. And
Thank you. So we've heard from Neil and George, who obviously work for Breakeven, and obviously have been in long-term recovery, sustained recovery. It's a great pleasure to introduce Abby as well, who is on our latest podcast. So if you haven't listened to it, it's a fantastic listen. One of my favourites, personally, that's a personal opinion. But we'll hand over to Abby just to talk about your experience, but also your journey through recovery as well.
Hello. So my name is Abby. So I started gambling. I've always been around. I'm from a seaside town, and I'm 39 as well, so what can you say about that? And I grew up with the arcades and casinos and things like that. It's never really affected my life. I've done the arcades and things like that, but it's never really bothered me. When I had my 3rd child, I had postnatal depression, and I found that I was sat when I was breastfeeding, just watching telly all day, and all that was on constantly was adverts for tombola, all different kinds of things, and right then and there I was looking for that dopamine hit. I was looking for something to make me feel good about myself, because I've got raging ADHD, and whilst I've been forced to sit constantly either feeding or comforting my children, I was looking for somewhere to sort of escape to. It started with a bit of bingo, and I just started winning. I was like, wow, this is great, it's amazing. I'm like, oh, this is money that I've never really had before, because I've always, even though I've got a degree and a master's degree, I've never really earned money. It just seems to have been from my child, like having a child, having sort of no money. And I thought it was the best thing ever. And then whilst playing bingo, it kind of showed those little mini games at the bottom, which were like the slot machines, and before I knew it, I was playing them, and they just took over. Bingo was boring, I weren't touching that anymore, don't care about it. It was all about slots. And before I knew it, I woke up thinking about it, I went to bed thinking about it. In fact, I didn't even go to bed. I used to make excuses as to why I don't want to sleep, like, oh, my baby's going to wake up in a minute, I'm not going to bother going to bed. And to the point that I got to a point last year where I thought, either I'm going to die or I need to stop, because it was all consuming me. My children were talking to me, I was like, shh, just go away, give me 5 minutes. Before I realised that 5 minutes had gone, it had been an hour. Before I realised that 2 hours had gone, and I was still like, just 5 minutes more, that's what I wanted. I found that while I was cooking their dinner, while I was bathing them, I was playing slots. I was not even looking at them. Like, I just noticed that my son had gone from like 1 to 4, and I don't really know how we got there. And then last year, I contacted, no, it was like 5 to 12, and I'm sitting there, I'm waiting for my wages to go in, and I'm waiting, and it goes in at 5 past 12. By 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd spent nearly £3,000 on nothing, literally nothing, no bonuses, I didn't win, and it got to a point where I was just like, I can't do this anymore. My family's suffering, I'm suffering, and yeah, I phoned the National Gambling Service in the morning, phoned my doctors, and I just said, right, I don't want to do this anymore. And as I kept saying, I've got a gambling addiction, I need help, I just felt lighter and lighter and lighter, and then before I knew it, 2 months had gone. I hadn't even thought about, I've been accessing all this help, and I haven't gambled, and before I knew it, I started thinking about it all the time, and the amount of wins I've actually had in my life since not gambling has been incredible. Absolutely incredible. I'm going back to work, I don't feel depressed anymore, I don't feel, I just feel lighter, and I've admitted to all my family and friends that I have an issue, or I had an issue, and that I manipulated them into giving me money, and I lied, and I was deceitful. But you know what? I felt like I'm so grateful to everybody that's helped me, and especially to Neil up at the Green Shoots course. I found it absolutely empowering, because what we talk about is going forward, but actually sometimes going backwards a little bit, finding out how much you've lost and things like that is actually really eye-opening. And then obviously I do WINGS, which is Women in Need of Gambling Support, every Wednesday. I don't miss it. That is mine. With Sally, she is there every Wednesday without that. I think there's been one where we've not had it for a week. There is women all over the country that are just all struggling with this stigma around women doing it, especially when you've got children. Why would a woman gamble away money for their children? It's a brilliant service. So thank you.
I think what it just highlights is that the support that's available now has progressed massively since 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And at Breakeven, we're constantly trying to evolve that support as well, to try and get everyone to access the services that are available. So whether that's the aftercare groups, whether that's women-only groups, whether that's anything within the service that is going to reach out, the work that Harge is doing, the criminal justice stuff. We want to try and reach as many people as possible, breaking down that shame and that stigma that is still attached, let's be fair. But your stereotypical gambler really back in the day was a 60-year-old guy walking into the betting shop. It's not like that these days. It can literally affect anyone. So to access as many people as possible, so to hear the support you get and you have received and are still continuing to receive, that's, as many people we can get as that. And I do recommend anybody that hasn't listened to the podcast, listen to it, because that was a snippet of Abby's journey so far. So we've got probably, 5 minutes for a couple of questions, maybe, if anyone wants to ask any questions of any of the guys.
Just very quick, I'm conscious that I know Abby, you do need to shoot off, so if you do,
okay, that doesn't include
George
Abby.
and Neil might be able to ask some questions, but if you
A
do.
question for me first, if you have one, then I can
Okay. Any questions from the room?
Yes. What's the statistics between men and women in gambling?
So to hand, I don't have them. However, we've noticed that certainly in the last few years, it's massively changing. It's more of an even keel, I would say now. So, however many years ago, it was obviously predominantly men, generally between sort of 35, 45, that sort of age. Now there's a lot more women that are approaching the services. We're seeing it a lot more, so hopefully that stigma is coming down, but it's still predominantly men, but the balance is shifting massively. Arch.
Just want to touch on the point that you said about men and women. Well, it doesn't really matter, both men and women, because for every man there's an infected other who's a woman, and there is financial, emotional, other types of abuse that come with it. So I would say they go hand in hand, but there is definitely more of a rise of, I think now where there's more opportunity for women that's more culturally aligned or informed, where they can seek more relevant support.
The reason I asked is, what's the latest name on stage again?
It's Abby.
Abby, the reason I asked is because obviously Breakeven have come to mind and helped them for 3 years in a row now. This is year 4 that I've worked with them, and it's the first time that we've had a woman with this experience.
I think that's why I said it was one of my favourite podcasts. We've done, I think, 12, 13, because for somebody to come out and have the courage to talk openly about it, because there is more stigma in that line of gambling harm. And I will ask you one question, Abby. What's the sort of dynamic and the feeling around that stigma in the women-only group? Because obviously Sally runs those groups 5 times a week. There's more and more people accessing that group, which shows that maybe the stigma is reducing. But what's the general feeling of that in those groups?
It is how I was feeling literally about the day before I lost all that money. I was thinking, I've got to be the only woman that is doing this. There is no woman in a million years that's going to be gambling away the idea, like their children's food money or their children's clothes money. What kind of person does this? And that is one of the things we talk about in the Wings group is, well, actually, no, it is an illness. It is, you know, it is something you can't control. By the way, up until the point that I lost all that money that night, I still thought I had a handle on it, even though I didn't. I absolutely didn't. But when we speak in Wings group, it is about how people view us as terrible mothers, and we, you know, and all that. There is a lot of stigma around that, and obviously not just women with children, but yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And in answer to your question, with the mix, it is actually 60-40. So 40% of women accessing the service are experiencing gambling-related harm, which I would imagine if you looked at 2, 3, 4 years ago, that number would have been way, way lower. So it's picking up. It's not something that you want to promote as a number, but there's so much more of an even keel now. Got time for one more question if anyone has one? And then we've got some sandwiches and lunch at the back. Yes?
In regards to earlier on, we were talking about approaching the GP and asking questions, and one of those questions being, is gambling an issue? While you were gambling, if a GP had asked you if you were gambling and gambling was an issue, would you have said yes or no?
It's me.
All three.
I actually approached my GP numerous times regarding, I didn't necessarily, they never asked me a question. I wanted someone to ask me the question. I wanted to be found out, because I knew that once I was found out, once they asked me that direct question, I wouldn't be able to lie. My eyes would show it. However, they never asked that question. It was only when I phoned them up and I spoke to them directly and said, I've got an issue with gambling, I need help. That was the only then did they actually do anything. I had a brilliant doctor. She phoned me every few days to check off on me and everything to make sure I was still getting help and support. But yeah, I don't think had I not approached them, I would have got asked. I'd never got asked it. So.
Wasn't Emma your GP, was it?
I had a similar experience as well, where I think the common theme is if the individual has the courage to speak to their GP about it, then some GPs will be able to support or signpost or guide. And it sounds like your experience was quite healthy, but I don't think there's any onus to be inquisitive and ask those questions around financial harm and, you know, mental well-being and stuff. There's no sort of follow-up from the GP, I don't think. It comes from the individual, which a lot of people don't have that ability to do that. I think that's a general consensus that we find. Yeah. I think that is lunch, guys. Thank you very much.